As guitarists, we need to be pragmatic sometimes when harmonizing for ourselves, when playing a melody. We don't have as many notes or fingers available to us as, say, a piano player does. So we need to be clever with some of the notes that we leave out or particular notes that we want to play. We need to choose them carefully. Hi, I'm Tyler Cooney. I teach here at the Jazz Music Institute in Bowen Hills in Brisbane. And here at JMI, we're creating a world where everyone can play jazz. Okay, so today I'll be taking you through a few different levels of playing a melody and harmonizing on the guitar. So to start off with, the melody that we'll be harmonizing with will be Thelonious Monk's Blue Monk. First 4 bars, you know the rest. That'll be our case study for today. So level 1 is just playing the melody by itself. No harmonization at all. But even at this level, we have some considerations to make. So on the guitar, there are, as you probably well know, multiple ways of playing the same note in the same octave. There are 4 middle Cs on the guitar, which is why it's notoriously tricky to read on, and but I'm not making any excuses. Okay, anyway, so this melody can be played in the same octave in multiple different positions on the neck. So we can play it how I played it at the start there, on the B string. We could play it on the G string. And you can hear the timbre, the tone sort of starts to change. Right, play it on the D string. Play it on the A string even. That's in the same octave. As we move towards the body and away from the neck, towards the neck is kind of brighter. And the further we go towards the body, it gets darker. The tone, right? The note stays the same, of course. So we can consider, okay, well, how do we want our sound to sound like? This is before thinking about harmonization or anything. So it's a good idea to, play around in these different positions on the guitar and find which one you like. I personally like the one starting on the B string. It's bright, kind of cuts through nicely. But you experiment with that yourself and see which one you like. Something as well to consider there is that on the guitar, and when we're harmonizing, we're generally playing notes underneath the melody, right? So the melody is the highest note, so we can hear that. That's how the ear generally works. We hear the highest note as the melody, and the notes underneath is the harmony. So that means we need, when harmonizing on the guitar, strings underneath our melody note as well. So if you move this way, let's say you get to the A string, you're playing it here, well, you don't have any other strings apart from the E string below you to harmonize with. So you're running out of options, basically. You could do something, but it's very awkward, even just the hand position. So the more strings you have below you or towards the ceiling, the more notes you can fit in under the melody. So that's another consideration to make. Then, still on level 1, if we talk about playing the melody in a different range, a different octave, well, we could play the melody here, which is the octave below where we were playing it before. Has a deeper sound, of course, and again, if we want to harmonize below that, we don't have a lot of options. But maybe you just play it as a single note melody, that's fine. We can play it an octave above the original octave. Of course, that sounds cool. They all have their different feelings, they all occupy different spaces. So let's say you're playing with a guitar trio, bass, drums, and guitar. If you're playing your melody as a single note melody up here, Meanwhile, your bass player is playing lines that are an octave below this. They might be playing something like this. But of course, they're an octave lower than that even. You've got a lot of space in between, empty space, you know? So maybe you might want to try and fill that space in with some chords if you want to play in this octave. Another reason why maybe you want to play a bit further down so that you're closer to the bass without being in their way, and you don't have this big kind of no man's land in the middle. But maybe you want that. All these options are just sounds. They're just choices. And if you want that sound, that's up to you. But you want to be aware that that is the sound you're going for, and there's going to be a lot of space in the middle. And then maybe you want to be aware of some ways to fill that space. That's where the harmonization comes in. So that's level one. Even before we leave level one, we can play in octaves, which is that's kind of level 1.5. We're not really harmonizing yet. We sort of are, but not with any new notes, right? So octaves is, of course, made famous by Wes Montgomery. We all know what that sounds like. So that's a way to sort of stay in single note land while giving it a bit more punch. We're still only playing one note at a time, but we're starting to get towards a harmony. Not quite, but we're starting to. Okay, so now level two. So level two is where we actually have harmonization going on. We've got two notes this time. We have the melody and then our first harmony. So I'm going to stick with the melody in this octave and in this spot on the guitar for most of the time. That's where I normally play the melody, so that's where I'll talk about it from. So with harmony and harmonization, there's a caveat. You can harmonize any note at any time with any other note or group of notes at any time. But, and it's a big but, you need to understand what those sounds sound like, how to use them properly, and what situations they'll be appropriate in to do a successful harmonization. You can't necessarily just play any random notes you want. At the end of the day, music is completely subjective, and you can do whatever you want, of course, but some things will sound generally better than others. And sometimes you just need to expose your ears to certain sounds more to, I suppose, be comfortable with them. Everybody knows the sounds of thirds and sixths, but maybe some people don't like the sounds of, say, sevenths or seconds as much. But again, it's personal preference. So let's start with thirds. Okay, thirds is probably the obvious place to start. And with this melody, it works perfectly because, as I said before, we're harmonizing below the melody. So if we harmonize below the melody, a third below the melody, our melody being the third of the chord, our harmony note will be the root, which is a perfect harmonic choice. So if this is our third here, of B flat 7, of course, we're in the key of B flat, a B flat blues, our harmony note will be B flat, the root. So, okay, let's just take the first phrase. So we've got this. So our melody goes 3, 4, sharp 4, 5. Okay, so some of those notes are chordal tones, as in the third and the fifth. One of those notes is a scale tone, which is the fourth. And one of those notes is a chromatic note, which is outside of the scale, doesn't really belong in the scale, which is the sharp 4. So with these different types of notes, it can be tricky sometimes to know how to harmonize them. If it was all chordal tones, it might be a bit easier to choose what to do. Sometimes we need to work in a certain way to figure out how to harmonize those notes or think in a certain way. So what we can do is we can take the first note, the third, and the last note of the phrase, the fifth. Okay, so that's we've got our start point and our end point. Both of those are chordal tones. So our start is a chordal tone and our end is a chordal tone. So at least we have some kind of blueprint for, okay, we probably want to choose the first note, our root, as our harmony for our third, right? And our third below the fifth, which is the last note of our phrase, third below that is the third of the chord. Okay, so we've got our start and our finish. So you can see, even just by my finger shape, so that is a major third down. So from the third down to the root is a major third. On the G and B strings, we've got the same fret, right? But here, a minor third, you can see my hand shape has changed. We're now on the 6th fret and the 7th fret. So not the 6 and 6 or not the 7 and 7, 6 and 7. So still a third, but now it's a minor third. Okay, so now we're trying to fill in the gaps, right? So we've got our melody note and our harmony, and they're both chordal tones. The next one is a scale tone, as we said. So let's play the scale tone a third below that as our harmony. This being the 4th scale tone, a third below is the 2nd. Sounds nice? Right, we've just got that one step in the middle. So if we take that, our only note left, our only option left to harmonize with between our harmony of the 4th, which is the 2nd, and our harmony of the 5th, which is the 3rd, is the flat 3rd, or the sharp 9, the sharp 2. So now we're playing two sort of chromatic outside notes, but the ear kind of accepts that because we're coming from a strong place and we're leading into a strong place. Okay, all thirds, mostly diatonic, except for that last little bit. So we can do that same thing on the E flat chord. Easy. So our first couple of R's. We've got that. That's by thirds, right? And you can sort of follow that formula throughout the tune. And when you come up to maybe spots where you're like, I'm not sure what would sound best here, first of all, your ear is probably going to be the best judge of that. If it sounds good, it is good at the end of the day in music. Again, you can kind of do whatever you want. If it sounds good, it is good. But you can use some of these little tactics that we were just discussing to figure out maybe some other options of harmonizing. So that's thirds. Okay. So the other option would be sixths. The other sort of common way to harmonize a melody like this would be a sixth below. So a sixth below the third is the fifth. Okay, so that's another great choice. Our melody being the third, and our harmony being the fifth. Okay, that makes it easy because those are two chordal tones. So that's a tick for our harmonization, making it sound like the chord we're on. So again, we'll take our first note and we'll take our last note of the phrase and we'll kind of fill in those gaps and then fill in the other gaps in between. So we've got that, and then we've got this. So the melody is still the fifth at the end of the phrase. A sixth below that is the flat seven. So again, that's a tick. That's one of our chordal tones, flat seven. So just by looking at my hand shape alone, you can see that it's the same shape, right? And if our melody only goes up every single fret, well, we don't really have much other option with our harmony but to do the same thing. that sort of works. Now, even though when we're playing the fourth, which is a scale tone, we're not actually playing a scale tone with our harmony here. Now it's the sharp 5 or the flat 6. And then when we're playing the sharp 4 with our melody, now we're playing a diatonic note with our harmony. So that kind of goes a little bit against what I was saying before, but again, it's not really a hard and fast rule. Why this works is because of the direction. The melody is strongly going up by steps, half steps, and the harmony is following the same thing. It's starting from a strong place, it's following the same direction, and it's landing on a strong place. So kind of the ear just accepts the stuff in the middle, so long as it's not, too wrong. So again, the sixths. Same thing on the next chord, and with the next part of the melody. Kind of just, the rest sort of does itself in a way. That's a really good one for guitar. It sort of sits really nicely under the fingers. You don't really have to change that shape very much. So again, take that formula and play through it yourself. Find what you like. A quick consideration before we move to the next level is when you're playing through a melody, sometimes it's nice to have different parts of the melody harmonized in different ways. So rather than playing the whole melody in sixths or in thirds, you can mix that up, right? Just like you can mix up maybe playing different parts of the melodies in different ranges. So with this part of the melody, the first 4 bars, we've got one phrase, we've got another phrase, which is the same thing, upper fourth. Then we have sort of a finishing phrase, which is related, but sounds different. So I kind of think of that, or one way you could think of that is you've got these 2 calls and you have a response at the end. So these are the 2 calls, and then the response. So with that in mind, we can try and differentiate the calls from the responses, maybe with our harmonies. So let's say we choose to harmonize the calls with sixths and the response with thirds. So we're sort of giving each phrase or group of phrases a different feeling, a different kind of energy, or whatever you want to say. So we'll start with sixths and then go to thirds. So here we go. Thirds. So they both work, and now you're sort of giving the melody a little bit more depth than just harmonizing the same way every time. We're thinking, okay, cool, I've got a call and response. How can I differentiate that? And you don't have to do that, but it's a nice consideration to think about. Again, we want to be prepared for different musical situations, and this is one way to tackle one of those situations. So one final thing to talk about before we go to the next level is the sounds of these harmonies. So thirds and sixths are related sounds. Fifths and fourths are related sounds to each other. So thirds and sixths together, fifths and fourths together, and seconds and sevenths are also together. Thirds and sixths generally sound quite harmonious. They sound nice and warm and rich. Fourths and fifths have their sound. Sevenths and seconds have their sound, which are all different from each other. And even their pairs they're similar, but obviously they have their own differences. Thirds don't sound exactly like sixths, but they sort of sound a bit closer together than, say, a third to a fourth. They sound quite different. So a third to me sounds, because it's closer, it's a closer interval, it sounds more blended together to me, like one kind of amalgamated sound. Obviously there are two voices happening there, but they sound closer together. They sound more like a blended thing. Whereas a sixth, because it's wider, one, it sounds wider, so that's, consideration to make. But two, they sound to me like more separate phrases, separate voices. So it kind of sounds like there's two phrases happening that you can clearly differentiate, rather than this one kind of block that I think thirds sound like. So that's another consideration to make. You might have a different opinion to me, which is totally fine. But these are the things you want to think about. What does it actually sound like? Am I just playing thirds or sixths because it's easy to play? That's fine as well, but it's good to know why you're playing these things. Do I want it to sound this way? Do I want it to sound a different way? Okay, cool. So this will be level 3. This will be the last level. So level 3 is 3 notes at a time. So an easy continuation of what we were just looking at 2 options for level 2. For level 3, we can just put those 2 options together with the melody. So we've got our melody, the third of the chord. We've got our first harmony, which was the root. And we've got our second harmony, which is the fifth. So that's perfect. That's a triad right there. We've got our third for the melody, other 2 notes below it complete the triad. That's a perfectly strong harmonic choice. So yeah, I'm just going to fill in the gaps. Again, we'll take our starting point and our finishing point. The melody was the fifth. First harmony was the third. Second harmony was the flat 7. Again, perfect choice. That's no longer a B flat triad. Now it's a D diminished triad. And that, in the context of a B flat 7 gives us our flat 7, our third, and our fifth. So that's perfect. So if we put them together, we get that. Sounds more dense. We'll do it for E flat. Continue on. You get the idea. It sounds like 3 voices happening. So with that, we have level 3. All the things that apply on level 2 apply to level 3, but now you have sort of 3 voices at once to consider. Initially, we're only having our melody with 1 harmony and maybe thinking about how those 2 things interact. So if it's a third below, it sounds quite close. If it's a sixth below, it sounds wider. Now we have all 3, so it's going to sound close. It's going to cover that wider range. And it'll sound obviously like a more dense version of what we were doing with just 2 notes. One consideration to think about here is if we take from a piano player and try and think of how a piano player plays, they have separation with their right and their left hand, right? They don't have to do everything with just one hand like we do. So they can play a melody and then play the chords separately. So they might play da 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 boom, da 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 boom. Or they might play every note with a melody. Ba, 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 ba. They might play the first and last note of the melody with a chord. Ba, 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 ba. So we can try and experiment with that kind of stuff as guitarists. Again, it maybe doesn't come as easily to guitarists to do this sort of thing, but it's important to try and mess around with this kind of stuff to see what you like, to see what's possible. So if we try something like that, we can still play the melody as a single note line, but maybe just play the first note of the melody with some harmony, you can hear there, I'm sort of throwing in chords, maybe at the start of the phrase, maybe towards the end of the phrase. And what it does is it gives some punctuation to those notes. The ear is still hearing it as single notes mostly, but then we're adding in some extra punctuation. And it sounds like there's more going on. It doesn't just sound like we're only playing single notes or we're only playing chords the whole time. Although, of course, both of those are good options. So guys that do this kind of thing would be, say, someone like Ed Bickett, whereas maybe talking about playing only one note before of a harmony, like thirds or sixths, maybe somebody like John Scofield or Peter Bernstein, particularly with picking certain notes to be harmonized and not just harmonizing every single note. They're still playing a single note line, but they're saying, I want that last note to be emphasized. It still sounds like a single note line, but there's little bits of punctuation here or there. So guys like Scofield and Bernstein do that sort of thing. And guys like Wes or Ed Bickett play the sort of bigger, fuller chords. And of course you're going to find, heaps of other people that do that. You'll find heaps of examples of those guys not doing that, but that's what comes to my mind when I think about that kind of thing. Okay, cool. So just to summarize really quickly, we've looked at 3 different levels of playing a melody with harmony. The first level is no harmony, but we still have some considerations to make, like range, what part of the guitar, what part of the neck we want to play on. We looked at level 2, which is adding a note. And again, these are very, very brief sort of overviews of these things. You can go very, very deep into this type of thing. Every tune you can explore all these different options. But this is just a way to get you started if you're not sort of sure how to get started, and maybe also give you a few considerations that you might not have thought about. And then level 3 is 3-note chords, 3 notes at the same time. Again, same sort of things apply. You can experiment with, say, playing those triads that we played, but changing one of the notes to something else and see what that sounds like. Changing 2 of the notes, playing something completely different. It's up to you. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this lesson from JMI. My name's Tyler Cooney. If you liked the lesson, hit the like button. If there are other comments or topics that you'd like to discuss, leave a comment and subscribe so that you don't miss future videos. And thanks for watching.